Have you ever noticed that ads for insurance companies don't put the product in front of you? They show you emus and geese and flow and shit. I wanted to use this article to finally declare digital advertising dead, but I couldn't because it's not entirely true. I mean, there's still that awesomely evil Whiplash guy showcasing weirdly disastrous claims for farmers, and Liz Lemon's boyfriend running around as the mayhem guy. But for the most part, it's Patrick Mahomes cutting it up with Travis Kelce, trying to get us not to think about those horrifying moments after the collision while reminding us we need someone to call. Insurance as a product is difficult to understand, and more importantly, its value prop is something no one actually wants to think about. But I'm not here to bash insurance. Like I said, I set out to write an article on the death of digital advertising. I rewrote it 6 times, and it was trash every time. I'll admit I'm part of my own problem. I'll be the first to tell you that as a card-carrying member of the Everything Sucks wing of the Gen X Army, the concept of advertising in any form is lost on me. I skip video ads with prejudice, and if I can't skip them, I mute them. Take that, Google. And granted, if you're reading this very post somewhere other than Medium, you're probably being interrupted by an ad break every 4 sentences. Does that make me a hypocrite? No, it just makes me not naive. I know how the world works. Anyway, the article never materialized because I was dead wrong. Advertising is fine. Maybe not for you and me, but as far as Mahomes and Kelce and their ilk are concerned, advertising is not in decline. The decline is in marketplaces. And the decline of marketplaces is something I already knew was happening. It wasn't hard to spot. First of all, there was definitely an external and somewhat artificial catalyst propping up a lot of nascent marketplaces shortly after the start of the pandemic. A perfect storm of consumer free time, consumer free cash, and the maturity of no-code, among like a dozen other smaller catalysts, birthed a wave of marketplaces for almost any product or service you could imagine. A lot of those marketplaces are now flaming out or have already flamed out, the ones that put vibe over value. It's something I've been railing against for the better part of 3 years. A slick brand, that's the vibe, and an open door for buyers and sellers can be called a marketplace. It can even lead to a lot of early customer and vendor acquisition. But it's the engagement and transactions, the value, that keeps the marketplace viable when those external catalysts disappear and all your customers go back to work and then inflation happens. So where did those marketplaces turn when the catalyst vanished? When you bring buyers and sellers together in a digital marketplace but don't provide any additional value, any key benefit for them to transact through the marketplace, they won't transact through the marketplace. The vendors will sign up. Free leads are free leads. And that fills the marketplace with products and services, which makes the storefront attractive to customers on the front end who might be looking for those products and services. But again, if there's nothing in the marketplace model to add value to transacting solely and repeatedly through the marketplace, the customers will do nothing. Then the vendors will do the same, and they'll leave the marketplace altogether when the sporadic prospect of jumping through a third-party hoop to serve a random customer every once in a blue moon becomes more trouble than it's worth. For the marketplace, this is a death sentence. No transactions means no revenue. But instead of figuring out ways to add value, that's hard, a lot of marketplaces went back to the future, so to speak, and took a page out of the 2010 apps and social networks playbook. These no-value marketplaces had a bunch of customers who weren't buying any product, so they just turned their customers into product. And it's not just marketplace startups that sprang up during the pandemic that leaned into ads. When eBay announced their 2023 Q3 results recently, they announced revenue up 5%, GMV up 2%, active buyers flat at 132 million, and first-party ad revenue up 39% to 345 million. When you don't add enough value to the marketplace to get your customers to buy product from your vendors, you can just turn customers and vendors into product and sell that to other vendors to run ads against their engagement. It works, but it's not sustainable because that engagement, as I said before, will always die off without the promise of the transaction. And in that scenario, maybe digital advertising is in decline after all, or at least broken. Sure, it works for streamers and media and content, but not for marketplaces and apps. 10 years ago, I started telling entrepreneurs not to count on advertising as a revenue stream because selling ad space is a business in and of itself, and it's not sustainable unless you're willing to sell your customers as product instead of selling your product as product. This happened over and over again in the 2010s with mobile apps that weren't particularly useful or valuable, and it's happening now with marketplaces that are leaning on vibe over value. The cycle continues. The marketplace doesn't have to sell product, it can sell ads. The ads don't have to sell product. They can sell emus and geese and the reassuring handsomeness of Jake from State Farm. I swear I wrote this article at least a dozen times and I kept hating it more and more every time I wrote it. I'll do this. I'll spend hours on an article and then trash it if it isn't coming together. It's not worth pushing out quantity that isn't good quality. Now, normally you never see these posts, but sometimes in this case, they're an idea trying to get through and beyond another idea. And that finally came together and I wrote the article. The screen I showed earlier is from a collection of articles I did on marketplaces, and I've done a lot of them. In fact, you can find all my articles at joeprocopio.com. There are over 500 of them, so choose the ones that are right for you. Speaking of content, that segues nicely into Teaching Startup. That's my project to provide access to actionable, insightful, and honest startup advice for entrepreneurs at all experience levels, regardless of their connections or resources. We do this with 700 plus questions, answers, posts, and polls, with new Q&A each week in a newsletter. All access to Teaching Startup is $10 a month, and that price is probably going to change soon at some point. So if this stuff is interesting to you, you can like or subscribe or whatever. But if you want to support what I'm doing, you can help me help you by becoming a member at teachingstartup.com. I appreciate you. Now go do great things.